Hello guys, Glorious Eggroll here, and it is 2016, and that means we're going to do a 2016 updated version of my Arch Linux EFI install guide. Last year I had posted a guide. It was a three-part guide with, a guide for installing Arch Linux. Now, it was my first guide that I've ever done, and I got a lot of positive feedback from it. I got a lot of good comments, things contributing, things that had changed throughout the course of the months. And what I would like to do in this series of videos is go ahead and do this install guide again and address some of those things that have changed and address some of those issues that people were having. Excuse me. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Obviously, you see I have my point that way, that general direction. My URL over there. Every step in this guide can be found on my blog at that address. So if you need something, or you didn't see a command, or you missed a command, go ahead and check that out. I have been thoroughly cleaning it up so that it's up to date as well with the guide. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Let me put on my my display capture so you guys can see this. There's obviously my guide. And the first thing we're going to have to do is go to archlinux.org/download. We'll go here, you find your country, and pick a mirror that works for you. Last time we used aggregate.org, we'll use that again. And click whichever, you click the 2016-201 dual ISO. That's all you need. Go ahead and click it and download it. Make sure just whatever one ends in ISO is the one you need. So download that. I've already downloaded it, so I don't need to click it again. The next thing is you're going to need Rufus if you're on Windows. Rufus is going to allow you to burn that ISO that you download for Arch to a USB drive. If you're on Linux, there is a command that you can use. So say you're on a different Linux distro and you want to try Arch Linux. So you would have to use this command right down here. Sudo dd if equals / path to the ISO of equals and then the path to the USB device. Excuse me, I've got a cough here. So you would do that for Linux. Make sure my capture is still going here. Now let's go ahead and open Rufus and I'll get started on showing you what you're going to do. We've opened Rufus here, and take this USB stick and I'm gonna stick it in the slot right there. Boop. It'll pop up here in a minute. Boom, there it is. Okay, so one question that somebody asked me is the partition scheme. Does it have to be MBR? It does not have to be MBR. You can use whatever you want as long as it boots UEFI. It's not going to affect your Arch Linux install at all. And forgive me if I say ARC, because the whole set of last videos I was pronouncing it as ARC, and then afterwards somebody on Reddit corrected me and said it's Arch, not ARC. So I'm trying to pronounce it correctly now. Just for shits, we're going to go with the GPT partition scheme for UEFI, because that's the one that the person that asked wanted to use. So we'll use that. Now the file system, you need FAT32. In order for it to be able to boot, you need FAT32. So we'll select FAT32. Make sure these three are checked. Make sure this says ISO image. Make sure you have the right USB stick selected up here. Don't want to be wiping the wrong one. Click this little button and select our Arch Linux ISO that we downloaded. And then hit start. It'll pop this up. It says ISO hybrid image detected, blah 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 blah. You can just go ahead and hit right in ISO image mode and hit OK. It'll ask this if you want to destroy all the data on there. If it's a USB stick that you have stuff on that you want to save, make sure you save it first, because this will wipe everything on that USB stick. Go ahead and hit OK on that. It may also pop up and say you have it's using a syslinux version that Rufus doesn't have, and it'll ask you if you want to download the updated files. Just go ahead and hit OK on that, or yes, whatever the prompt says. You'll be fine. So you click OK on those things. This little bar right here where it says ready will start. It will be green and it'll progress until it's finished. Once it's finished, you can go ahead and close out of Rufus, pull out the USB stick, and then we're going to plug it into our new machine that we're going to install Linux in. Alright, now let me go ahead and take this display capture off, and we're going to put on our capture card here so that you guys can see. Now, another complaint that I had gotten before was that people couldn't see the text because it was kind of small. So what I've done is I've got the main text here on the screen, which you can't see my mouse cursor, but at the very top I've also got this little black bar, and that is going to be the bottom of the window so that you can see what I'm typing. And I will try my best to scroll all the way to the bottom before typing commands so that people can see them. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Reboot this system here. And part one is going to be partitioning the disk and getting the file system set up, and then we'll proceed to part two afterwards, which is installing the Arch base. While this is booting, we're going to spam delete to enter setup. As it says, press delete to run BIOS setup. Some motherboards have a different key for that. It may be delete, it may be F1, it may be some other F key, who knows. Just make sure you hit the proper key that your BIOS says when it's booting up, and you'll be able to get in here. So let's go to our settings. We'll go to boot, and boot mode select. So any motherboard in your boot section of that motherboard is going to have an option to select UEFI or legacy UEFI. Any modern motherboard, I'm saying that, not anything old or relatively old. If it doesn't have EFI, it's old as shit, and you should probably get rid of it. So we're going to select UEFI. I have no need for legacy, so I'm just going to use normal UEFI. And then we're going to handle something that somebody else asked me about, which was, go to settings, we'll go to advanced, and we'll go to Windows 8 8.1.10 configuration, also known as secure boot. A lot of Linux distros now are compatible with secure boot. However, I don't feel it's necessary. It's something that was made for Windows particularly, and that everybody else kind of just had to adapt to. So I leave that disabled. I don't deal with that. Also, if you have any fast boot options, I leave those disabled as well, because what those do is those try to disable things that aren't necessary to boot the system up until after the OS is booted so that it boots faster. I want to make sure, especially if you're installing something, I want to make sure that those things are enabled before the OS installs or before the OS boots, so that it picks those things up during the install. So I make sure fast boot is disabled so we don't miss anything. And then we go ahead and escape. The last thing is you're going to go into your boot. Now, some people have a fast boot option where you can just hit hotkey minus F11 and it'll bring up an option where I can select which drive. If you don't have that, you're going to want to go into your boot options and make sure that one of these is selected for USB key, UEFI USB key, or whatever your USB stick is listed as in that. And you're going to want to make that the first boot device if you don't have a boot menu option. That way your system will automatically know to just boot from it rather than waiting and booting back to Windows. Otherwise you're going to get screwed. So yeah, make sure your boot option has your USB key as your primary boot device, or you boot through the boot menu if that option is available. Let me go ahead and hit exit out of here. I'm going to hit save and save configuration and reset. That's fine. It'll reboot in here. And it's going to try to boot to the USB stick. We're going to hit F11 for ours, because that'll bring up our boot menu. Entering boot menu. There it goes. Okay. And then ours is this fat Patriot memory MP map. Click that. Okay. Now, as soon as you get to this menu, hit an arrow key so the timer doesn't run out. Most people should be able to just go ahead and hit enter on this first highlighted option that I have listed here. Now, I have an issue with this. Watch what happens when I hit enter without putting any options. Okay, triggering U events. The reason it's going to hang here is because I have a GTX 980 Ti, which does not play friendly with the USB loader, and it also doesn't play friendly with a clean Arch Linux install with no video drivers, because what happens is it tries to use the new view drivers, which don't work correctly with the 980 Ti at the moment. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to restart the system again. Hit our F11 again. Okay, go here again. Press our arrow keys again. And highlight this and hit E, and it'll bring up this little text line that gives us our boot options. So what we're going to do is type in no mode set space right before that line, and then hit enter. And that should allow us to boot into the USB stick. Boom. There you go. All booted and nice and pretty. Boom. Okay, so let's make sure that our internet is up. I'm hardwired. I'm going to make a separate video. I said this last time and I never got around to it, but a couple months ago I actually did end up installing Arch on my laptop and set up the Wi-Fi. I just need to make a video for it. And it's something that a lot of people, especially on laptops, are going to need for their Wi-Fi. So I will set up a separate video explaining how to set up Wi-Fi. It's not very hard. But for now, since we already have a wired connection, we're just going to go ahead and continue. So ping c3 google.com. We have internet. That's fine. Now what we're going to have to do is make sure that we're in EFI mode. EFI var, I think it's vars-l. It's var/l. Or -l. There you go. EFI var-l. And we've got our plethora of EFI variables that have shown up on our screen. For those that didn't see it, since I forgot to scroll, I'll type it in one more time. var-l. There you go. Now you can see what I typed in. And we are in EFI mode. The next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to set up our new drive. Excuse me. So we're going to hit LSBLK, and that'll give us a list of our drives. What I've got here is I've got SDA, which is a 1 terabyte hard drive that I use for storage for, you know, games and programs and stuff that I just don't want to lose. And then I have my SDB, which is my Windows drive, and that's what I use when I need to dual boot into Windows for something that doesn't run on Linux. I try to keep, I would rather not have that, but sometimes you have those programs, or in particular games, in my case, that don't run on Linux. And then I have SDC, which is just the USB stick that I'm running off of. And then at the very bottom, you see this NVMe0N1. Now that is not a particularly normal name for one of your drives. The reason it says NVMe is because it's an NVMe drive. It is a Samsung 950 Pro M.2 drive. So that's what we've got running, and that's why it says NVMe, because it's an NVMe drive. So that's what we're going to use. Obviously it's got some partitions there. We're going to wipe those partitions and show you how to do a clean install on it. Let me bring up my notes here. Notes, hello notes. Alright, here we go. So the first thing we're going to do is gdisk/dev/NVMe0N1. Boop. Okay. X for our advanced options. Z for zap, to kill everything on it. Hit Y. Hit Y again. That's done. Now we have to create our new partition. So we're going to do cgdisk/dev/NVMe 0 and 1. Boom. Press any key to continue. Okay. There's our whopping plethora of free space. Hooray! Okay, so first thing we're gonna have to do is our boot partition. So we do new. First sector is fine. Size. Most people, most guides recommend just a small size, like 512 megabytes or something like that. I give myself a gigabyte so that I have space or room to breathe in case I need to change something or upgrade or update something. So we'll do 1 GB for the size and the hex code. Now, another thing is a lot of guides, especially outdated guides, say to use EF02. That's not the code you want to use for EFI. It's EF00. EF00 is for EFI. I racked my brain for forever trying to figure this out. I would install a new system multiple times and be like, why isn't it booting? That's why. You need EF00 for EFI. So do that. Type in boot for the name and make sure our caps lock isn't on. Alright, so we've created our first partition there for our boot. Now, this 1007 kilobyte little free space here, you're never going to be able to get rid of it or move it or change it. It's always going to be there. It's part of the GPT partition scheme. Ignore it. You're not going to die. I, again, racked my brain over this as well for multiple times trying to get rid of it. You'll be perfectly fine just leaving it as it is. Okay, so we created our boot. Next thing we need to do is create our swap. Again, we'll go over this. There's a big debate on whether or not to use swap, especially if you have an SSD drive or a lot of RAM. Bottom line, you always want to use a swap. Say I have, okay, so my system has 16 gigs of RAM and I'm running an SSD drive. What happens is if I'm running a lot of programs and they're using a lot of memory, say in particular I'm running Photoshop in the background and I'm playing a game and I've got like, you know, Steam open and I've got like Uplay open or whatever other things are running that are, and I've got like a million Firefox tabs or Google tabs, whatever you want to call it. That's taking up a lot of memory. So what the system will try to do is it will try to store those in swap because they're inactive. On Windows, this is also kind of when Windows yells at you and says, hey, you're low on virtual memory. Do you want to close some applications? That notice that you get pops up when either your swap is full or you have no swap. The reason it does that, and both on Windows and Linux will, some versions of Linux that I've done or tried will just start closing stuff. So you don't want to do that. What it's trying to do is store things in swap so that it can make more physical memory available to you. And obviously when your swap is full and you're out of physical memory, it starts just immediately closing things down because it's literally out of memory. So we'll go ahead and create our swap here. First sector is fine. Second, size and sectors. The swap size, according to Red Hat, if you have 8 gigabytes or higher, which most modern systems do, if you want to use hibernation, you go with 1.5 times the amount of RAM. If you don't plan on using hibernation, which I don't suggest because it will kill your power bill, you can use 0.5 or half, but most standard installations use 1.5. So we're going to go with, I have 16 gigs of RAM and 1.5 times 16, it's 24. Well, 1.5 times 16 plus 16 is 24 gigabytes. So we'll do 24 gigabytes for our swap drive. Swap code is 8200. Name that swap. That's done. Next thing is creating our root and home partitions. Generally, if you're just running a desktop at home, you can create your root partition and then have just /home as a folder inside your root partition. But for security purposes, and if you're doing a server or anything like that, you really, really, really want to make your root and your home partitions separate. Ideally, you don't want to run anything as root. You don't want to install anything as root other than core system files.
You're quite proficient at clicking.
And somebody has just followed me. So you don't want to have any of those things. I lost my train of thought. That threw me off. Yeah, you don't want anything running as root that shouldn't be running as root. You generally want to run things as a normal user and have your home partition separate. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll do new. First sector is fine. Size and sectors. For our root partition, I believe the Arch Wiki recommends 20 gigabytes. I could be wrong on that, but 20 gigabytes should be plenty of space for root and not take up too much space for the overall install. Do that. Xcode A300 is fine. We'll do root. That's fine. And then lastly, we'll use the remainder of the space for home, because that's where your user files are going to be, and your user programs, user games, user profiles, all that stuff is going to be on home. So first sector is fine. Size and sector is going to be the remainder. Hex code is fine. And then we'll type in home. Okay, go ahead and go over here and hit write. Write this stuff to disk, hit yes. Operation has completed successfully. Hooray! Now we're going to hit quit. And now that all that stuff is written, we're going to reboot the system to make sure that it reloads these fresh drives or fresh partitions and doesn't have the other ones stored in memory. Reboot. Alright, so boot here again, hit our arrow keys again because we're gonna have to type in no mode set. Don't worry, once you install Linux, you're not gonna have to type this no mode set every time, especially if you don't have a 980 Ti. You shouldn't have to worry about it, but in case you do, you won't have to worry about typing that in every time, so just, I promise. Okay, this is going to boot up and through. There we go. Let's scroll all the way to the bottom so people can see this. LSBLK, list our drives with our fresh fancy partitions. And now we're going to assign file systems to these drives. Scroll down here on my notes. Okay, so mkfs.fat-caps F32 dev NVMe0N1P1. That is our first partition for our boot, and it has to be FAT32 in order to be able to boot from it, especially in EFI. So that's why we're making it FAT32 in case anybody's wondering. Boom, that's done. Next thing we gotta do, make swap dev NVMe0N1P2. There's our swap. We'll turn swap on. Dev NVMe0N1P2. And we'll make our third and fourth partitions for root and home as ext4 partitions. mkfs.ext4 dev NVMe0N1P3. It'll say this because I had a ext4 partition on there previously. You shouldn't get this if it's a fresh drive, but if you do, you can just overwrite it. Hit Y. I'm gonna do this again for 4. Y. Boom. All of our partitions are done. Now our drives are ready. They are good to go to start installing Linux. We're going to, well, Arch Linux, excuse me. We're going to go ahead and end this video here, and I'll start on the next video in a couple of minutes, and we'll continue from here as to getting the base system set up, configuring the system, and also we have to install our NVIDIA drivers. This is something new that before in the previous guides I'd covered in part 3, installing NVIDIA drivers, but we're going to do that in part 2 this time, and I'll tell you why in the next video. the links, I'll put all the links that you need for Rufus and the Arch download and my blog in the description, as well as the links to the other videos. So if you guys need any of that, it'll be there. Yeah, check out the next videos.